So our topic today, we are covering another thing that I used to cover a lot at the dealership. I live up in the Northeast, so we get a lot of salt and rot coming up off the road there, and it rots out the bottom of the cars, and a lot of EVAP issues due to that, especially on Subarus, because for some reason in their infinite wisdom, they decided to make a lot of the lines metal. So they would rot out, and then you would have all these, you have to custom bend lines and things like that. Oh, and don't get me started on the fuel filler next. But anyways, diagnosing an EVAP system can be a challenge. It depends on what kind of problem you have with the system. There's either leaks or there's electrical problems, and either presents their own challenges. But I think the leaks, especially because they can be up in those little pockets and up above the fuel tank and all sorts of mess in different places. So understanding, though, how it's set up, how it works, can help us with the diagnosis a little further on down the line. So let's first talk about the different components in the EVAP system. So we have the purge solenoid, we have the vent valve, we have the canister, we have fuel tank pressure sensor, and we have other pumps and associated modules. Now there's other pieces, parts that get thrown in, especially on more modern vehicles. And we're going to look at one here in a little bit. Different one-way valves and T's and things like that. We'll get into that in a minute, like I said. But first off, let's give a recap of how the EVAP system works, right? So we have this lovely animation here that I've been using for many, many years, but it works great to give you a nice visual of how does an EVAP system function when it's functioning normally, I guess. So we have our purge valve up here, which is the front door, and then we have our vent valve down here, which is our back door. Vent valve should be open at all times to allow the excess air in the fuel tank to be displaced when you put fuel in there, and then it pushes the fresh air out the back. So ideally, we are going to have the back door open under normal circumstances and the front door closed under normal circumstances. Then we'll add fuel to the vehicle. And like I said, any of that fresh air that's in the tank, or the air in any ways, I don't know how fresh it is, but it needs to be displaced out of the tank. So it goes up into the canister and pushes all that fresh air out, and then is stored in the canister. Now, of course, the canister has activated charcoal inside, and that absorbs all these fumes, and keeping those fumes in there to then be reburned. So once everything's full and we're driving the vehicle, we're going to open, and the vehicle gets up to temperature, of course. We're going to open the front door, which would be the purge valve, and it's going to purge all the fumes that are inside the canister, allowing fresh air to come in through the vent valve, and then it goes up and gets burned by the engine. Right? Easy enough. Once we're doing that, though, once we've expelled all of the vapors, then the next thing the computer is going to want to do is close the vent valve and leave the purge valve open, and that allows us to draw a vacuum down on the system, and that's how we're going to do our leak test. Now, some vehicles nowadays don't do this with the engine. They use natural vacuum, or they use an actual vacuum pump nowadays. I guess just to keep things more consistent. But it will draw a vacuum down, and then it will start a timer, and it will try and see, well, how long and if that vacuum does in fact bleed down. If the vacuum bleeds down, what's that mean? It means I got a leak. Now, depending on how fast it bleeds down, however, is going to affect how big of a leak I have. So if it bleeds down very fast, then I know I have a larger leak. If it bleeds down very slowly, I know I have a smaller leak. And now, of course, we know modern vehicles, they even have ways to know whether or not it's a gas cap or not, because there's code specific to a gas cap. It's just a specific flow rate, or some vehicles, like this next one we're going to look at, have a way of blocking and separating the two parts of the system from the canister to the tank. And that is a Grand Wagoneer. So this is the EVAP drawing, I guess you could say, the drawing of the EVAP system on the new 3-liter high output motor, the turbocharged one. And I picked it for two reasons. I picked it, the first reason is because it's turbocharged, and that causes some differences in how the system's going to work. And there's a fair amount of turbocharged vehicles out there on the road nowadays in one way, shape, or form. So they have to implement certain things that you might not necessarily find on a naturally aspirated vehicle. And the other reason I picked this one is because it has a really great picture of all this stuff. It's surprisingly hard to find from the manufacturer, like a really good picture of kind of how everything's laid out, right? So we have our charcoal canister there. They have the eSIM, which is the EVAP system integrity module, which helps to test for leaks. Also has a filter to the outside world now to keep some more of that EVAP, evaporative gas in there. We have the fuel tank pressure sensor there, which is actually a little further up this line. We have the purge solenoid there with a check valve and another check valve. And then we have they call the OBD vent valve, which is different than the vent valve that we talk about with the canister. And then we also have, of course, the intake manifold turbocharger, and they have this thing called the ejector T in there. So depending on how the vehicle is operating, if it's running under boost or if it's running with vacuum, it's going to dictate on which way the purged fumes are going to go and get reburned inside the vehicle. So here's their purge solenoid on this. It's a little bit different than what you might be used to because it has separate ports. It has check valves in it to allow for whether or not it is under vacuum or it's under boost. Then they have purge inlet from the canister, and that's the OBD to go to the OBD vent on that. And then the vacuum port goes out to the ejector T. Now, what is an ejector T? I'm going to talk about that in a second, but this is a block diagram of how this would work. So under naturally aspirated or the turbo not building boost, it's going to come out of the canister. It's going to go through the purge solenoid. And since we have vacuum, it's going to open up this check valve, and it's going to allow it to go through into the intake manifold as it normally would through the EVAP port. However, if we're under boost, air is going to be coming into the air box. We're going to have charged air in there, and that's going to be pushing on this ejector T, which also has a check valve in it. And that is going to allow this to come down. Now, if I'm also under boost, the intake manifold is under boost, so it's going to be pushing that check valve closed there. And then this valve here will be open. So it'll allow it to go down through here and back and get reburned going through the air box and into the turbo. So here's kind of what that looks like there. So the boost air comes in, pushes down on this little nozzle, and then purge air comes in here and then out to the air box there and gets reburned that way. So it gets into has to go through the turbo. So I guess over time might cause some issues there. I guess there probably isn't too much petroleum in there, so probably shouldn't cause too much problems, but it's mostly vapor, but you never know. So yeah, so this is how Jeep does it. Honda has a similar way. If you watched one of my last seminars on EVAP, they have it's basically almost like two purge valves are next to each other, depending on how it is, whether in boost, and a check valve's there as well. And then we have the eSIM module, which has two different weights inside of it, and it's going to push down on a diaphragm, depending on as it's checking for leaks, right? So it's going to have the small weight, which is for vacuum relief, and we have the large weight, which is for pressure relief, and it's going to go through there out to atmosphere. And then we have the canister, and this canister is a little unique too. There's the eSIM module we just talked about right there, but the canister also has a filter on the outside to allow the air to be more, or the vapors to be captured more instead of venting directly out to the atmosphere. It is going to be filtered out before it gets out to the atmosphere to reduce the number of pollutants going into the atmosphere. So used to be they just vent it right out to the air, right? Just right out the back of the car, open the vent valve, let it vent out. Now they're even more stringent, and they keep they have a little filter in there. So just to know, these are other failure points as well. And then the fuel tank pressure sensor, like I said, on this vehicle, it is like halfway up the vent, or halfway up the line that's on the filler neck, right? So we got the filler neck there, we got the fuel tank pressure sensor way up. And they say they mount them high on this particular vehicle because because if it's under some water, it's still allowed it to vent, I guess, is their reasoning behind it. I don't know how many rivers we're fording with our $100,000 Grand Cherokee or Grand Wagoneer, but maybe you are. So fuel tank pressure sensor mounted next to the filler neck, kind of higher up in the vehicle to allow it to stay out of the water. And then also, as I said, a little bit earlier, this vehicle has what they call a vent blocker valve, and that vent blocker valve basically causes two separate systems when it's closed. So we can have the tank isolated and we have the canister isolated on the other side of the system. So depending on what I need to test, if I think I need to test in the back by the tank, I can test all that stuff by closing this valve, and then you'll see where the smoke comes out if I'm checking for leaks. Or I can put it on the canister side and not have it filling up the fuel tank, right? So a couple different ways. It's like splitting a circuit in half almost, but it's a circuit of piping instead of a circuit of wiring, right? And that brings me to EVAP codes. Like I said earlier, you're going to want to distinguish, if you do have an EVAP code, whether or not it is telling you that you're looking for a leak or whether or not it's telling you that it's looking for an electrical problem, because this could bite you if you're not reading the entire description of the code. So for example, PO 440 EVAP problem, 442 is a small leak, 456 is a very small leak, 457 is a gas cap. Like I said, a lot of vehicles nowadays have gas cap codes. Or electrical, 443 could be purge control issue, or 446 is a vent control issue. 452 is a pressure sensor, 458 is a purge solenoid, right? So if I'm looking for an electrical problem, which is not necessarily, I guess some of these codes could be kind of one of both, right? So if I have a problem indicated with the flow of the purge solenoid, it could be that it's leaking. So that could be a leak, and it's also throwing in a code for electrical because it can't get it to close, I guess. So just think it through a little bit is what I'm trying to say. Think it through and see, is it calling for a leak and then I'll just test for leaks, or is it calling for an electrical problem and I should go down that road first before I go test it for leaks, right? Of course, I would imagine after you're replacing a solenoid or something like that, you probably want to check it for leaks anyways. Which brings me to leak testing. Now, leak testing, of course, we would want to use some sort of an EVAP tester or a smoke machine. I will say back, how long has it been since I've been at Subaru? About almost 15 years. When we worked at Subaru, we had an inordinate amount of EVAP problems, and they did not give us a smoke machine. So those were very difficult to test and find the problems, especially when they run through the frame and they're getting all rusty and they're metal lines. So you don't have a smoke machine and you're dealing with EVAP problems, I feel your pain, but I would like to, I think you should try and alleviate your pain by using a smoke machine. Because we had one that came back multiple times. And finally we said, hey, let's go borrow the one from the dealership next door, the Chrysler dealership. And sure enough, we brought it over, found the leak right away. But it was buried kind of inside the frame where you couldn't really see it visually if you're looking in any other way. So having a smoke machine would be very helpful. And this one this one pictured here happens to be the brand spanking new one that Snap-on just released, the EELD 700A. It is a low pressure EVAP tester and smoke machine. Also has the option for air only, so you don't waste smoke solution, which I thought that's kind of nice too. It's got a backlit flow gauge, so that's kind of nice as well. But when we are hooking up to the EVAP system, most vehicles will have a service port cap. If they don't have a service port cap, there's always quick connects and other hoses and things underneath that you can tap into and just put the smoke in there. If you are using a Schrader, the service port cap, reminder, there is a Schrader valve in there and you need to remove it in order to put smoke in there. And it is a lefty tighty, righty loosey situation. So it is a reverse thread. So make sure you turn it clockwise to remove it. And we put the smoke in, and we got to make sure the smoke doesn't come out. Now, I got a couple examples here of where they found some EVAP leaks over the periods of time that we've been collecting pictures and such. This was a leaking vent valve, so that's going to be my first stop because when I put the smoke in the system, I need to close the system, and if the vent valve's leaking, that's like the back door, right? So if the vent valve's leaking, that could be a problem because then I can't seal the system, and I won't find out where the smoke comes out. This is on a fuel sending unit. It was cross-threaded. They couldn't figure out where it was getting an EVAP leak from, and sure enough, it was coming right out the seal there for the sending unit. And then this was on a canister itself, so we can see there's the canister there, and we can see that those hoses don't look so great anyways, but you can definitely see it just pouring right out of that crack on that hose right there, right? So it's a little high up. Might not have been easy to see without smoke. Not sure, but that definitely is not a good looking hose. So not surprised it's leaking, but that's what the underside of most cars up here look like after a few years. So, and then electrical testing. Electrical testing, you're more than likely going to want to use a meter or a power probe, or you could even use, if you have a tool with guided component testing in there, that's probably your best place to go, is going to be your guided component test, because it's going to set it all up for you. It's going to tell you where everything is on the vehicle, and it's going to tell you how to test it. So in this example, it's a purge solenoid on a Camry. It's normally closed solenoid. Use the purge fuel vapor from the EVAP canister. These vapors are purged back in the intake manifold to be burned again in the combustion chamber. Purge solenoid is supplied with ignition voltage and is pulse width it is pulse width modulated control. There we go. ECM can use the purge solenoid to perform a system test on the EVAP system as well. So that's our leak test. By closing the vent solenoid and opening a purge solenoid, the engine pulls a vacuum on the entire system. Purge solenoid will then close and sustain a vacuum on the EVAP system. Pressure drops too fast, the ECU will set an EVAP related fault code, and so on and so forth. So that would be a good way to test. So let's look at some tests that we might be able to do on a couple different vehicles. First one I want to do is that Grand Wagoneer. And speaking of guided component tests, there are guided component tests in here under the engine. So if I wanted to go to the EVAP system here, you can see we have the eSIM unit, fuel tank isolation valve, which is kind of talked about, fuel tank pressure sensor, OBD vent valve, and the purge solenoid. So if we go to the eSIM unit, it's going to tell us how it works. It stands for EVAP System Integrity Monitor. It's very similar to the NVLD that they used to use, which is natural vacuum leak detection, although it does not require a solenoid. The eSIM mounts directly to the canister. This consists of a housing, a small weight, and a large weight that serve as check valves, a diaphragm, a switch, and a cover. There's a check valve for each of the weights. The eSIM assembly will with a seal attached at the end of each weighted check valve. The large weight check valve seals for pressure. Small weight check valve seals for vacuum. After the vehicle is shut down, the fuel system is sealed. As it cools, the internal pressure drops. If the pressure drops enough to close the switch, small leak test is passed. If the small leak test does not run, the PCM will run a medium and large leak test on startup. Using the engine vacuum, the fuel system will be drawn in a vacuum to test its integrity. So that's how it can quantify the size of the leak based on the size of the weight that would leak. So we have sensor, ground, and signal. And then we have a switch test in here, which is going to test the switch. So we hook it up to our scope module, and we hook it to ground, and we back probe there. And we would want to go at the switch sense. So that'd be the yellow wire to switch sense. So that's going to be here. So the signal is going to be the violet gray wire. Move filler cap to release any vacuum. Key off voltage should be 5 volts. Locate the purge solenoid. Connect hand vacuum pump to the vacuum line from the canister. So we mark can, or check for which one does not have engine vacuum when the engine is running. Reinstall the filler cap. Pull vacuum on the system while monitoring a voltage at approximately 1 inches of mercury. Switch should close and voltage to 0 volts. Relieve vacuum, voltage should go to 5 volts. So, simple on-off switch, 5 volt test. Fuel tank isolation valve. Normally closed fuel tank isolation valve located between the fuel tank and the charcoal canister is used to manage pressure and vacuum in the fuel tank. When the fuel tank isolation valve is closed, it splits the evaporative system into 2 separate diagnosable sections during leak testing, the fresh air side and the fuel tank side. So that way it can even tell where the leak may be. There's a DC voltage test for that. Fuel tank pressure sensor. 3-wire 5-volt unit varies its output based on the pressure of the fuel vapor. And vapor line just inside the left rear fender. Remove the inner fender liner for access. Like I said, it's halfway up, or part way up anyway. OBD vent valve. It's in series with the purge valve. The OBD valve needs to be turned on to allow vapors to get to the purge valve and open the eSIM switch for diagnostics. Power is from the ASD relay and ground is controlled by the PCM. Simple power and ground, open and close. And then we have the purge solenoid, which is normally closed solenoid. Use the purge fuel vapors to the EVAP canister. These vapors are purged back into the intake manifold to be burned again in the combustion chamber. Purge solenoid is chassis grounded and supplied with a modulated voltage from the engine module. There we go. Simple 2-wire again. You have a DC voltage test and a duty cycle test. So, lots of good information there in the guided component test. Also, if we wanted to go to shop key, this is where I got a lot of those beautiful pictures. I will say it is a challenge. Like I said before, it is a challenge to get Good pictures from OEMs. There's a TSB on the EVAP system too. YTech small leak verification tests. Tells you how to do that on the YTech, I guess. And then we have component operation, which will tell you all about it. So there's our graphic, right, with the T's and the filters and the check valves. And then we have our diagram, the ejector key and how that works. Then we have the eSIM and how that works. Fresh air filter, fuel tank pressure sensor, internal tank valve, tank vent valves, grade vent valve, and a fuel filler check valve. eSIM stuck closed diagnostic, purge performance diagnostic. This is the OBD vent valve, does that. Then we have the purge solenoid, and then we have the vent blocker valve, which is that other valve that closes the system in two different ways. All right, so that's Jeep. Let's go to this Cadillac here. Cadillac has a new test that's been added on this Cadillac, the CT4 with a 2-liter. And if I go into my functional tests, we have our usual EVAP service bay tests, right, which is a big GM thing. One thing about this EVAP service bay test too, and there are other tests on other manufacturers that can force EVAP tests. You need to make sure you follow the test parameters. If it goes outside of parameters, it's not going to work and it's going to stop. It's going to fail. So verify the EVAP test monitor is not already completed. Do not start the engine. Set the ignition to on run position. Transmission to park or neutral. Follow the data parameter EVAP test state on the test screen to know when the vehicle is ready for drive cycle and ignition off stages of the test. So it's going to go through a bunch of things. On the data display screen, start the engine and let it idle. It's going to go through that. And it's going to say waiting for purge enable, and so on and so forth. You would just monitor that, and then you'd hit complete, and then it'll walk you through the next steps to do so. There's also EVAP emissions canister purge valve leak test. So this is a new test that's been added. So instead of just doing a bidirectional on and off, this one cycles it for 30 seconds. So you can set it to not venting, which is closed, and venting, which is open, and then release control of the module. So it'll do it for 30 seconds. It'll count down. It'll hold it closed or open. And I don't think I want to wait 30 seconds. So that is a new test added for that. Should help with some of those EVAP emissions related leaks for the purge valve anyways. Oh, I got to do a 20. Oh, never mind. I got a component test on this one. We will instead switch our focus to the Focus. Ford does things a little differently as well. If I go into engine, functional test, special functions, they have a couple unique tests in there. So they have the EVAP system gross leak test, they have the EVAP system small leak test, and they have the EVAP system cold soak time bypass. So this is allows you to not have to wait for a certain amount of time before the EVAP test occurs. So it's procedure to erase freeze frame data, reset OBD monitors, clear engine and transmission codes. Bypass EVAP cold soak time, key must be on with engine running. And then it's going to go through there. Do not cycle the ignition key off. EVAP system cold soak time bypassed, ready to perform the EVAP readiness monitor. And then you would go through and do the monitor. And that's going to give you your readiness monitors right there to tell you whether or not it's complete. So EVAP right there. And you can go do that. So you don't have to wait. And that's kind of similar to like what Toyota and Subaru do, where they have 5, 7, or 9.5 hour wait after the key is off. That's a cold soak. It just has to cool off, right, to make it more accurate, I guess. And then, oops, there were got a component test on that one, though. We're going to got a component test on this Focus. We got EVAP. We got fuel tank pressure sensor, purge solenoid, and vent solenoid. So much like every other fuel tank pressure sensor, it's going to be a 3-wire. PCM uses the fuel level input and fuel tank pressure signals to determine activation of the EVAP leak check monitor based on the presence of vapor generation or fuel sloshing. There you go. And we got the purge solenoid. We got a few things we can do there. As part of enhanced EVAP system controlled by the PCM, the valve controls the flow of vapors from the EVAP canister and the intake manifold, 0 to 100% duty cycle. So signature test and resistance test can be done on that one, and then event solenoid. DC voltage test and resistance test. That's an on-off as well. Seals the EVAP system from the atmosphere. It's closed by the PCM with 100% duty cycle to allow EVAP purge valve to achieve target vacuum on the fuel tank. All right. And then I think there was one more I wanted to do, this RAM. So this is also a Chrysler thing, but it's a little different. So we have miscellaneous functions. We have a PCM small leak verification test right there. That's kind of unique to them. So perform any service bulletins or flash updates related to EVAP fault codes before proceeding. So this will not solve those problems. That you'll need to do a flash for that. Procedure uses pressure over time to detect a leak. There are 5 possible test phases. To get past in test phase 2, the evaporator system will need to be either heating up or cooling down. So it's just going to tell you your parameters that you need to do. There's a possible leak in the system, or if the system is very stable, a second intrusive part of the test phase 4 and 5 will run. Engine must not be running, so it thinks the engine is running. But that is a small leak verification test. That could be helpful. Oops. System tests, not related. Functional tests to be bidirectional controls, and in the simulator it doesn't show any EVAP stuff, but on the real vehicle it would. And there should be some guided component tests on this as well. EVAP. eSIM unit again. It has an eSIM unit just like the Grand Wagoneer is what it was. Fuel tank pressure sensor and the purge solenoid. All right. So that is EVAP. Hopefully you learned a little bit of stuff about checking for leaks and checking for electrical problems and things of that nature. Just remember, pay attention if it is like a turbocharged vehicle. You're going to probably have some other things in there, check valves and such, and you're going to want to take a look at a diagram of how the system operates, so you know where you'd be testing for leaks on that case. All right, so that is EVAP, like I said, and let's talk about what we're going to talk about next week. Next week, we are back to the top of this 6 series of classes. So OEM-specific ADAS training on Mercedes-Benz. So we're going to go back to that. Look at how ADAS behaves uniquely on Mercedes vehicles. So if you want to join me for that, always every Tuesday, 6 and 9 Eastern. If you want to join me on YouTube, the 6 p.m. Eastern class goes live to YouTube. And you can scan that QR code right there, and it'll bring you right to the channel and subscribe you automatically. If you are watching the channel, please make sure you're subscribed and you like the video. It really helps me out. And then session 2 is going to be on Zoom and Facebook. So it goes to our Facebook page. So it's Snap-on Diagnostics Product and Training. And either or, we can go to Zoom for snapon.com/OT. You can register for that. The nice thing about going on Zoom is you will also get a certificate emailed to you the next day. That's what I'm trying to say. So you can say, hey, I was here and I attended this training. So some people like to print them out, hang them up, that sort of thing. All right. Any other topics in this series? If you want to check them out, they are all on YouTube, all on a playlist for live training. So it's everywhere from intro to ADAS through misfire diagnosis and ADAS specific training, OEM specific training, etc. Over the last 5 years that we've done. This is episode 126 we're doing right now. So this will be up there shortly. All right, check them out. Also, do we have your email address? If we do not have your email address, you may be missing out on some important information, such as Tech Focus articles, SureTrack blogs, quick tips, new product releases. Things like this technical focus article on diagnosing a timing chain, right? So if you're not getting these emails, scan that little QR code. You will start receiving these valuable emails to your inbox. And it's not like we spam you 5 times a day or anything like that. It's maybe once a week, if that. So learn about the new product releases that are coming out too. Always good. All right, time for questions. So if you do have a question on Zoom and you look for that Q&A button, top or bottom of your screen, type it in, and you will you'll ask a question. If you're on YouTube, feel free to use the live chat function as well. Jay on Zoom says, thank you for the class. You're very welcome, Jay. Thank you, as always, for attending every week. So It's always appreciated to have the regulars in here, right? Not that I don't appreciate anybody new, but having those regulars that are always here, always participating, it's always good. Thank you for that. Yeah, it looks like we're a little light tonight on the questions, so that's fine. So with that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with me. Hopefully you picked up a couple little tips and tricks on the on oh, I have someone on YouTube. So TJ Trent says, thanks for doing these. I've learned a ton from the previous videos. Well, thank you very much for watching. It's always appreciated that you have people watching this, right? So thank you as well. You're welcome and thank you. So hope everybody enjoys the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. Hopefully we'll see you next week for Mercedes ADAS. Have a nice night and take care.